At Teddy Pendergrass's women-only concerts in the late 1970s, teddy bears were handed out to the audience, not as a gimmick, as a statement, a specific, deliberate statement about what kind of performer Teddy Pendergrass was and what kind of experience his concerts were designed to provide. The teddy bear was not an accident. The nickname was not an accident. Nothing about what Teddy Pendergrass built in the years between 1977 and 1982 was an accident. It was the most carefully constructed intimate image in the history of R&B, and it worked in ways that the people in the venues could not entirely explain afterward, in terms that the usual vocabulary of music journalism was not quite built to capture. The nickname Teddy Bear arrived from the audience rather than from any deliberate branding decision made by a label executive or a marketing consultant. It described something specific. Not the power of the voice, which was real and enormous and undeniable, but the specific quality underneath the power, the warmth, the presence, the specific feeling of being directly addressed by a voice that seemed to know what you needed to hear and had decided to give it to you completely, without reservation, without the protective distance that most performers maintain between themselves and their audience. A teddy bear is not merely soft. It is the object that provides comfort, that reduces the specific kind of fear that everyone carries simply by being present and warm and entirely focused on the person holding it. That is what Teddy Pendergrass's voice gave to the people who received it. The nickname was accurate. It was just not what you would expect from the most powerful baritone in R&B. It was not what you would expect from a man who had 3 platinum albums before his 29th birthday, who sold out concert halls in every city he played, who produced in his female audiences a level of devotion that the concert industry had not previously had to account for logistically. And yet it was exactly right. James Brown was the godfather of soul. Marvin Gaye was the prince of Motown. These were titles that announced magnitude and historical significance, that told you before you heard a note that you were in the presence of something that had changed the form and would continue to define it. Teddy Pendergrass's nickname announced something different, not historical significance, not formal magnitude, something more personal and more immediate and, in the specific economy of what Teddy Pendergrass was offering, more powerful than any of the grand titles. The other great male voices of the 1970s R&B world each occupied a specific emotional territory and stayed in it with the consistency of someone who had found their ground and was not going to be moved from it. Marvin Gaye occupied a kind of bruised romantic intelligence, the voice of someone who understood love deeply and painfully, and who made that understanding audible in every phrase, whose recordings felt like the private thoughts of a man who was thinking too clearly about things that most people preferred not to think about at all. Al Green occupied a transcendent sensuality, a voice that seemed to dissolve the boundary between the sacred and the physical in a way that was both unsettling and irresistible, that could make a gospel chord progression sound like an invitation and a love song sound like prayer. Barry White occupied a different territory entirely, the voice of seduction constructed at a specific frequency, the bass note that organized the room around itself and that required nothing from the listener except the willingness to be organized. Each of these was extraordinary. Each was singular. None of them was what Teddy Pendergrass was. What Teddy Pendergrass occupied was the territory of tender masculinity, a phrase that sounds like a contradiction until you hear him do it, at which point it sounds like the only possible description. He had the power. The baritone was enormous and genuine, and could fill an arena without visible effort, could move from the quietest passage to the fullest voice without the strain that indicates effort rather than gift. But underneath the power was something that most powerful voices do not have and cannot manufacture: the specific quality of care, of attention, of a voice that was addressing you, specifically you, the individual listening, not the crowd of thousands in the same building, with the full weight of everything it had. The women who came to his concerts described it consistently in the same terms. He made them feel seen. He made them feel that the song was about them. that the voice was for them, that in the specific duration of the performance, they were the only person in the building, and the voice was there for their benefit exclusively. No other performer of his era produced this effect with the consistency and the intensity that Teddy Pendergrass produced it. The nickname Teddy Bear was the audience's attempt to name the effect, to find a word for the specific combination of strength and warmth and focused attention that the voice gave them. They reached for the most familiar object that provided that specific combination. A teddy bear is not merely soft. It is the object that provides comfort, that reduces the specific kind of fear that everyone carries by being present and warm and entirely focused on the person holding it. They gave that name to one of the most powerful singers in the history of American popular music, and the name fit perfectly. The women-only concerts did not begin as a deliberate strategy. They emerged from something that was already happening, from the specific quality of the response that female audiences gave Teddy Pendergrass at regular concerts, from the intensity of that response, and from the specific logistical problems that the intensity created for the people responsible for managing the venues. Women drove hours to see him perform, not just from neighboring cities, but from distances that required real planning and real commitment, real reorganization of schedules and responsibilities. Women waited in lines that stretched around the block and then waited in. Those lines without leaving, in weather and through time, in a way that the concert industry was not accustomed to seeing for any performer outside of the largest stadium acts. Women threw their undergarments onto the stage, not as a gesture of general enthusiasm, but as a specific targeted offering, directed at a specific person, in the specific hope of being individually noticed among the thousands in the building. One woman shot another woman at a concert, not over anything personal between them, but over a scarf that Teddy Pendergrass had used to wipe his face and thrown into the audience. Two women reached for it simultaneously. One of them had a gun. This is the specific level of intensity that the nickname Teddy Bear was attached to, the specific level of devotion that a man whose nickname suggested warmth and softness could produce in the people who came to see him perform. The teddy bear was not the whole story. It was the gentle surface of something considerably more powerful underneath. The women-only concerts were the concert industry's way of concentrating and honoring that devotion. They were not a gimmick invented to create an image. They were a response to something that was already real, an acknowledgement that the relationship between Teddy Pendergrass and his female audience was sufficiently specific and sufficiently intense to deserve its own dedicated space, its own context, its own rituals. At the women-only concerts, teddy bears were handed out at the door. The gesture completed the statement, "This space has been built for you, organized around what you came for, designed to give you the experience that the music promises, without the presence of anything that might compete with or diminish what is happening between the performer and the audience." The concerts were sold out everywhere they were held. Women organized travel and childcare and work schedules around them. They described the experiences afterward in terms that were not the usual vocabulary of concert reviews, not in terms of the set list or the staging or the production values, but in terms of how they felt during and after, which was the vocabulary of an experience that had addressed something personal and had given them something that the ordinary structure of daily life did not reliably provide. Teddy Pendergrass understood this. He had built toward it deliberately, had constructed the image and the performance style and the specific quality of direct address that the concerts required. He was not accidentally giving his audience what they needed. He was intentionally giving them what they needed, and he had spent years understanding exactly what that was and exactly how to deliver it. The image Teddy Pendergrass built between 1977 and 1982 was the most deliberately constructed intimate image in the history of R&B, and it was built on an accurate foundation rather than on a manufactured persona. The warmth was real. The care was real. The specific quality of attention that the voice gave to the person receiving it, the quality that made women feel seen, feel addressed, feel that the song was about them and them alone, was not a performance technique that could be learned from a vocal coach or a stage director. It was the genuine expression of a performer who understood, from the inside, that the relationship between a voice and a listener was personal rather than general, that music was not an announcement made to a crowd, but a conversation conducted with an individual, and that his specific gift was the ability to make that conversation feel real, even in an arena full of 10,000 people. He had learned this in the church. His mother discovered his voice when he started singing in church as a child in Philadelphia, and the church taught him what gospel always teaches its singers before it teaches them anything else: that the voice is an instrument given for a purpose, that the purpose is to reach the person who needs what the voice carries, and that reaching requires closing the distance between the singer and the listener completely and without reservation. You do not perform at a gospel congregation. You give to them. The distinction is the whole thing. Teddy Pendergrass had taken this principle out of the church and into arenas, out of sacred music and into bedroom ballads, out of worship and into the specific secular territory of love and desire and the human need to be understood by another person. The principle remained identical. The voice closed the distance. The listener felt reached. In the church, the thing the voice was reaching toward was the divine. In the arenas and the women-only concerts of the late 1970s, the thing the voice was reaching toward was the individual woman in the seat, her specifically, her personally, with all the full attention of a voice that had been built in the church to give everything it had to the person receiving it. The nickname Teddy Bear named this. It named the specific combination of power and warmth, and close personal attention that the voice produced in the people who received it, the combination that was so specific and so unusual that the audience had to reach for the most familiar available object to name it. James Brown was the Godfather because he built something that did not exist before him, and that required his specific force of will to bring into existence. Marvin Gaye was the Prince because he embodied something refined and melancholy and interior that nobody else occupied in quite the same way. Teddy Pendergrass was the teddy bear because he gave something, because the experience of his voice was the experience of receiving something warm and present and entirely focused on you, of being held in the specific way that only the most intimate voices can hold a listener. The church had built that in him. He had carried it into arenas, and the audience had named it after the most comforting thing they knew. By 1980, Teddy Pendergrass stood at the pinnacle of R&B stardom. He had released 3 consecutive platinum solo albums in 3 years. His 4th album, TP, arrived in July 1980 at the absolute height of his commercial powers, confirming what the concert sales and the women-only sellouts had already made clear. Teddy Pendergrass was not building toward his peak. He was already there. Eddie Murphy mentioned him by name in his Delirious stand-up special in 1983, as a cultural reference point that an entire mainstream American audience was expected to recognize, immediately and without explanation. That is one measure of what the teddy bear phenomenon had become, something that a comedian could invoke as shorthand for a specific and universally understood set of associations. The nickname, the women-only concerts, the specific quality of female devotion that the concerts produced, all of it had entered the shared cultural vocabulary at the level where reference requires no explanation because everyone already knows what you mean. The 1982 accident changed the specific form of what Teddy Pendergrass offered without changing what made it valuable. What remained was the voice, and what the years after 1982 demonstrated, through Love Language, through Live Aid, through Joy going to #1 in 1988, was that the voice alone was the thing. The teddy bear was not the body on the stage. The teddy bear was the voice doing what it always did. That had not changed. That could not be taken by an accident. It was in the voice, and the voice was still there. The nickname Teddy Bear named this. Named the specific combination of power and warmth and close personal attention that the voice produced in the people who received it. The church had built that in him. He had carried it into arenas. He had built a career on delivering it, and the audience had named it after the most comforting thing they knew. He was called Teddy Bear. He was the most successful solo R&B artist of the late 1970s. He staged women-only concerts where teddy bears were handed out at the door. He produced devotion of an intensity that the music industry had not previously measured and did not have adequate language to describe. And when the accident of 1982 changed what the performance could be, the voice that had built all of this was still there, still closing the distance, still addressing the listener directly, still giving them what the nickname had always promised. Still warm, still present, still entirely focused on the person receiving it. The name for all of this was the name of a toy. It was not what you would expect from the most powerful baritone in the history of R&B. It was exactly right. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe. Every day, we tell the stories behind the music, including the ones about what a nickname actually means when it sticks. Hit the like button if you believe that Teddy Bear was the most powerful nickname in the history of R&B, and tell us in the comments, did you know that teddy bears were handed out at Teddy Pendergrass's women-only concerts? Because the nickname was not an accident. Nothing about what Teddy Pendergrass built was an accident. We'll see you in the next one.